Hello everyone, I want to ask you a question before we begin. If I told you that only about 1 in 10 patients I've ever cared for at 75, 80 years old is truly healthy and independent, driving themselves to the store, remembering every grandchild's name without anyone reminding them, would you be curious why it's only 1 in 10? Not because they're wealthier, not because they have better doctors, not because their genes are better, but because they quietly have kept up 6 very simple habits that most people have long forgotten. I'm Sarah, 45 years old, and I've spent more than 20 years working directly in elder care, both in long-term care facilities and doing in-home care for individual patients. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not here to quote you the name of some university or medical journal. I'm here to tell you what my own eyes have seen, what my own hands have touched, through hundreds of patients, thousands of home visits, decades at the bedside of the elderly. And what I've realized after all these years is that the people who are truly healthy at 75 to 85 aren't the lucky ones. They're the people who, consciously or not, are still doing the 6 things I'm about to tell you today. Before I go into detail, I want to ask you for one small favor. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please subscribe now, because every week I share what I actually witness in elder care work, not textbook theory. And I want to know about you. Leave a comment below telling me how old you are this year, and out of the 6 habits I'm about to share, how many you think you already have. I read every single comment. Truly, this community means a great deal to me. Now, let's go through those 6 things together, starting with number 6. Habit 6. Drink water on a schedule, not just when you're thirsty. I remember very clearly a patient named Margaret, 81 years old, living alone in Phoenix, Arizona. Her daughter called me worried. The older woman kept complaining that in the afternoons her mind felt wrapped in cotton wool, that standing up made her dizzy, and one day she'd nearly fallen right in the kitchen. When I came to see her, the first thing I asked wasn't what medications she was taking, but how she drank water throughout the day. Her answer didn't surprise me at all, because I'd heard it 100 times before. I only drink when I feel thirsty. This is something a lot of people don't know, and I wish someone had told them sooner. After age 70, our body's thirst signal becomes much slower. That means your body can already be seriously dehydrated, while your brain still hasn't sent the thirsty signal in time for you to know to drink. I like to compare the body to a delivery system of trucks. When the water supply in your body runs low, the trucks carrying oxygen and nutrients to your brain and muscles slow down, 2 deliveries arrive late, and the whole system starts to malfunction. With Margaret, we didn't change any medications, didn't add anything complicated. We changed just one thing. She drank a glass of water right when she woke up, before even making coffee, then a small glass with each meal, and 1 glass in the mid-afternoon, right when she tended to get dizziest. 6 weeks later, she told me it felt like someone had wiped a layer of fog off the window of her mind. She no longer got dizzy standing up, and her afternoon fatigue had eased considerably. The healthiest patients I've ever met don't wait until they're thirsty to drink water. They drink with intention, on schedule, every day as a habit rather than a reflex. There's one small thing I always tell my patients: don't just drink plain water mindlessly. After age 70, our kidneys also have a harder time holding on to minerals, so sometimes you can drink a lot of water and your body still won't fully absorb it, because it's missing a bit of mineral salt to go along with it. I often suggest patients add a pinch of good quality sea salt or an electrolyte tablet to their morning glass of water, like needing a key to open the door so water can actually enter the cells, rather than just passing through the body and out again. It's a very small detail, but I've seen it make a noticeable difference in quite a few patients. Habit 5. Resistance exercise at least twice a week. I need to clarify this right away, because I see it constantly misunderstood. When I say resistance exercise, I don't mean you have to go to the gym and lift heavy weights. I'm talking about any movement where your muscles have to work against some kind of force: a resistance band, a small dumbbell, a wall push-up, or simply carrying your own grocery bags from the car into the house. I once cared for a pair of patients living in the same apartment complex in Columbus, Ohio, both 80 years old, with relatively similar baseline health when I started tracking them. One, I'll call him Robert, used a resistance band twice a week to stretch his arms and legs, just 15 minutes each time. The other did almost no movement beyond walking around the house. 3 years later, Robert could still stand up from a chair on his own, still climb stairs, while his neighbor had to start using a walker and had already broken his wrist in a fall. That difference, I've seen it repeat too many times to call it coincidence. After age 75, our muscles become more high maintenance. The same effort produces a much smaller response than it did in our younger years. Without regular stimulation, muscles quietly weaken bit by bit, and that is the shortest path to falls, fractures, and loss of the ability to care for oneself. For patients I encourage to start, I always say, don't think about the gym. Think about standing up and sitting back down from a chair 10 times 2 to 3 times a week, or using a light resistance band while watching TV. Just that alone can make a big difference over time. One thing I always emphasize to families is that timing matters just as much as the exercise itself. I usually recommend light movement about half an hour after eating a protein-rich meal, say, after a lunch with eggs or chicken, because that's when the muscles are most ready to receive for recovery and growth. I like to compare an elderly person's muscles to a garden that hasn't been tended in a long time. If you only water it without adding fertilizer, the plants will still weaken over time. But if you combine the right things at the right time, even with very small efforts, that garden can still turn green again, even after seeming barren. Habit 4. Sleep on a consistent schedule. Every day there's a patient I'll never forget, named Dorothy, 83 years old, living in Charleston, South Carolina. After her husband passed away, her daily routine fell completely apart. Some nights she stayed up until 3 or 4 in the morning watching TV. Some days she slept until noon. Her daughter brought her to see me because she was worried the older woman was becoming increasingly forgetful, one day even forgetting whether she'd already eaten lunch. I'm not one to judge anyone's sleep habits, but over the years in this line of work I've noticed something very clear. Patients who go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, even on weekends, consistently have sharper minds than those with irregular sleep schedules. Not because they sleep more, but because their bodies know exactly when to rest deeply and when to be alert. With Dorothy, we rebuilt a very simple schedule, going to bed and waking up within the same 30-minute window every day, keeping the bedroom cool, and turning off all screens at least an hour before bed. A few months later, her daughter told me her mother's hearing and memory were noticeably sharper, and her mood was much more stable too. I've also noticed a small but very effective detail among the best sleepers. They usually spend about 10 minutes before bed breathing slowly and deeply, instead of scrolling on their phones or watching the news until they get sleepy. With Dorothy, I taught her a very simple breathing technique: inhale for a count of 4, hold for 2, then exhale slowly over 6 counts. She told me that small practice helped turn down the noise in her head before sleep, and she fell into deep sleep much faster than before. Sleep, for older adults, isn't just rest, it's when the body repairs whatever wear and tear accumulated during the day. If sleep is repeatedly disrupted, that repair process gets interrupted too, and the consequences usually aren't visible right away. They build up gradually over the years. Habit 3. Eat enough protein spread evenly throughout the day. This is the thing that worries me most whenever I talk with patients' families, because I see one misconception repeated over and over. It's normal to eat less as you get older. No, that is not normal at all. I once cared for a patient named James, 78 years old, in Scottsdale, Arizona. His daughter brought him to see me after realizing he'd lost nearly 8 kilograms, which his previous doctor had simply dismissed as natural age-related weight loss. But when I looked more closely, I realized he wasn't losing fat, he was losing muscle. His handshake, once quite firm the first time I met him, had grown noticeably weaker, to the point where he needed help opening a jam jar. We didn't change any medications, didn't add any expensive supplements. We simply reorganized his meals so that each main meal had a clear protein source: eggs, fish, chicken, or Greek yogurt, instead of piling it all into one dinner as had been his old habit. 3 months later, he had regained nearly 5 kilograms of muscle, and for the first time in 2 years, he carried all his own grocery bags from the car into the house without anyone's help. I like to compare protein to bricks the body uses to rebuild itself every night while you sleep. Without enough bricks, that house will slowly deteriorate without you noticing, until a fall or a serious illness hits, and you suddenly see just how weak you've become. One thing I always tell families is, don't pile all your protein into a single meal of the day, because an older person's body can only absorb a certain amount at each sitting. The excess won't be used to rebuild muscle. It'll simply be burned off as energy. With James, instead of one large piece of meat at dinner as had been his habit, we spreaded out an egg and a bit of cheese at breakfast, a portion of chicken breast at lunch, fish or beans at dinner. This even distribution, I've found, makes a much bigger difference than simply eating more protein without paying attention to how it's spread across the day. Habit 2, have at least one real conversation every day. I want to tell you about a patient who completely changed how I think about health in older age. After her husband passed away, she essentially shut herself off from the world, no longer going to church, no longer calling old friends. Just 8 months later, when her daughter brought her to see me, I noticed her memory had declined noticeably compared to her previous visit, to the point where I was genuinely concerned. We didn't change any medications. The only thing we did was rebuild a real social schedule for her. A weekly book club meeting, a 15 to 20-minute phone call every day with a family member or friend, and 2 small volunteer shifts each week at the local library. 8 months later, her memory test scores had nearly returned to their previous level, and her daughter told me that, hearing her mother's voice on the phone, it felt like her mother had come back. What I want to emphasize here is sitting in the same room watching TV with someone doesn't count as real social connection. What makes the difference is conversation where you truly listen, truly respond, truly laugh, truly debate. Those are the moments that keep the brain regions tied to memory and emotion active. Habit 1. Learn or try something new every day. This, after years of observation, is what I believe is the most important of all 6, and also the one fewest people actually maintain. I once cared for a patient, a retired engineer, in Portland, Oregon, 79 years old. For the first 3 years after retiring, he admitted to me that he did almost nothing that truly challenged his mind. He began forgetting the names of people he knew, struggling to keep up with more complex family conversations. I gave him just one suggestion. Pick one thing he'd always wanted to do but never tried, and do it every day, even if only for 20 or 30 minutes. He chose oil painting, something he'd never touched in his life. He admitted, with his own sense of humor, that he was terrible at it at first. But 18 months later, he had completed more than 20 paintings, joined a small local painting club, and what pleased me most when I checked in with his family. They told me he remembered names and conversation details far better than he had 3 years earlier. Our brains, after age 75, tend to prefer doing only familiar things, because that conserves energy. But if that continues indefinitely, the brain's ability to adapt gradually erodes. Learning something new, whether cooking an unfamiliar dish, learning an instrument, or taking up painting like that engineer, is exactly what forces the brain to keep working, to keep building new connections. Something I always stress to patients is that watching someone else do something isn't the same as doing it yourself. Watching a painting tutorial online doesn't create any change in the brain. It's the moment you actually pick up the brush, clumsy, making mistakes, trying again, that fumbling moment is when the brain truly has to form new connections to adapt. I often tell my patients that the slight discomfort, the slight awkwardness of learning something new isn't a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign your brain is actually being trained. Now I want to tell you about someone I think about often whenever I make videos like this. Her name was Patricia. I first met her in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when she was 77, just a few months after her husband passed away. When I first walked into her home, the curtains were drawn shut. She barely left the sofa all day, wasn't eating properly, and when I tried to talk with her, she only answered in short phrases, her eyes staring off into the distance. Her son called me in tears, saying his mother seemed like half of her had switched off since his father died. I didn't arrive with a list of medications or a complicated treatment plan. I arrived with exactly the 6 things I just told you about. We started very slowly. The first week, it was just 1 glass of water each morning and a short phone call with her granddaughter. The second week, we added a few gentle movements right there on the sofa. Little by little, month by month, she began eating full meals again, began sleeping on a regular schedule, and then what surprised me most, she voluntarily signed up for a community gardening class nearby. A year after I first met her, I went back to visit, and the woman who opened the door was a completely different Patricia. She invited me in to see the small garden behind her house that she had planted with her own hands, told me about the new friends she'd made in her gardening class, and she smiled a smile I hadn't seen at all when we first met. Her son told me, his voice breaking, that he felt like he had his mother back. I'm telling you this story not to move you for no reason. I'm telling you because I want you to see that these 6 things aren't distant theory. They're very concrete, very human things that I've personally watched make the difference, turning someone who had nearly given up on life into a woman who plants her own garden, laughs on her own, lives her own life. So if you're watching this video, I want you to do one small thing today. You don't need to do all 6 things at once. Just pick one. Maybe it's drinking a glass of water the moment you wake up tomorrow morning. Maybe it's calling a friend you haven't spoken to in a long time. Maybe it's trying to stand up and sit down from a chair 10 times before bed tonight. Just one thing, and stick with it for a week. I also want to remind you of something important. Everything I've shared today comes from my own real-world observations over many years in this profession, not medical advice meant to replace your doctor. If you have any health conditions, are taking medications, or are considering any change to your diet or exercise routine, always talk to your doctor or pharmacist first before making any changes. I would never advise you to stop, change, or reduce any medication on your own without your doctor's approval. Now, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling me how old you are, and out of the 6 things I just shared, which one you think you're already doing well, and which one you want to start today. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know your story. And if this video was helpful to you, next week I'll tell you about the smallest warning signs I always watch for before a patient falls, signs I wish every family recognized sooner. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that one. See you next time, and please take good care of yourself because you deserve it.